Hello, everyone. If you haven't been watching previously, my name is Abby, and I am the Young Adult Assistant at Mary Vincent Memorial Library, and I work in the Hancock branch, and I use she, her pronouns. So, today, I wanted to talk about 3 different books, and I just kind of wanted to focus, since May, if you didn't know, is actually Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So, what I wanted to do is recommend you some books either about kind of different, has different Asian representation, whether that be the authors or the characters, and I just wanted to focus on some of those books today. So, the first book that I will be talking about is called The Shadow of the Fox, and it's by Julie Kagawa, and Common Sense Media recommends it for ages 13 and up. So this book is both on audio and ebook format. So this book is a Japanese inspired fantasy, and it's about a girl who is half human, half kitsune named Yumeko. And if you don't know what a kitsune is, it is like a 9-tailed fox demon. It's kind of mythology in Japan. So Yumeko is raised by priests, and she's kind of lived there her whole life, and they've been training her to kind of understand her kitsune magic and just kind of what she should do and kind of keeping her out of trouble because she's a little mischievous. But as she is living there, the temple that she lives at with the priests is actually attacked, and it's burned down, and everyone dies in a really horrible way except for Yumeko. And before her main guardian priest passes away, he gives her the dragon scroll that they have been guarding for thousands of years, because the dragon scroll can grant one wish, and usually that wish is used for really terrible reasons or wants. So the priests have been protecting it in order to keep it out of people's hands who might want to use it for bad reasons. So it's up to Yumeko to kind of keep it safe, since the priests have all passed away and the temple has been destroyed. But she's not really sure what to do, and she's also in a lot of danger kind of doing this. So as she comes along, she meets this other character in the novel whose name is Tatsumi, who is called the Kagai Demon Slayer, and he works for a clan who actually wants the dragon scroll, and he knows that it was at the temple. So he runs into Yumeko as she's running away, and they kind of strike up an alliance. Yumeko kind of hides the fact that she has the dragon scroll from him, so she'll help him. So he's kind of going, and so they form an alliance, and they kind of go on a journey to bring the dragon scroll to safety. But they run into a lot of different things along the way, which you will find out about if you read this book. It's really good. So there are reasons why I liked it. I really liked Yumeko as a character. I think she's really funny. And I like how they explore her kitsune magic and explain that, and kind of go into Japanese mythology. It's really interesting. I also really like Tatsumi. He's a really interesting character, and very sad. He needs lots of love. Another reason I really like this is it's actually kind of like an anime. So if you watch anime and you really enjoy anime, this book kind of reads like a traditional fantasy anime would kind of be told in storyline. So if that's interesting to you, you might really enjoy this book as well. The action scenes are really good. The thing about this book is it's kind of like a journey book, which, if you don't know what that is, if you've ever read The Hobbit, or if you haven't read The Hobbit, or you've watched The Hobbit, they're kind of like going along on a journey to get to a specific destination, and that's kind of how Shadow of the Fox is. They go on a journey the whole way there, and so there's not really one set location until towards the end of the novel that they're trying to reach, but they make little stops, and at each little stop there's some sort of thing they have to overcome, so it keeps things really interesting. So it's constantly moving, and because there's so many different locations, the world is really well developed in the story, which makes it super interesting to read about. And then it's also a series, which I think is really good, because I really like reading book series. I believe it's a trilogy. I know the second book is also on Hoopla. I do not believe the third one is on yet, but I know the second one is at least on there in audiobook format. So yeah, definitely recommend that one. And if you end up liking that series, Julie Kagawa has written a lot of different series, so if you really just enjoy her writing style, you can go through and see what else is on there by her. And I think a couple days ago, Dabney actually made like a list of like all of the different Asian American / Pacific Islander authors and like works that are specifically geared towards that, so you can look through that and kind of find stuff from there as well. The next book that I will be talking about is called Descendants of the Crane by Joan He, and Common Sense Media actually hasn't reviewed this one for ages. I personally think it's probably more geared around 14 to 15 year old, just because there's a little bit of violence in it, but I think it's a really good read, obviously. So this is also offered in ebook and audiobook format. I'm looking at my notes, by the way. This is also an ebook and audiobook format, like Shadow of the Fox. This is a standalone fantasy, though. She has said that there are opportunities for her to do companion novels, which, if you don't know what a companion novel is it's sort of set in the same world as a book, but it's not necessarily like a series, and it doesn't follow the same main character. The main character from the previous book might be in there, but they most likely won't be the focus of that next book. So if there were to be a follow-up book in this world, it wouldn't follow the main character that I'm about to tell you about. So this is a Chinese-inspired fantasy, and it follows, you kind of thrown right at the beginning into the middle of the story, but it follows a girl named Tisina, and her father has died, and he is the king of the dynasty or empire that they're in, so she kind of gets thrust into being the queen, and supposedly her father has died of natural causes, but she doesn't believe that at all. She thinks it was murder. And so she's trying to sort of figure out what actually happened to her father. So what she ends up doing is she seeks out a soothsayer and does magic, which you wouldn't really think that's a big problem to sort of understand what's happened, but magic is actually forbidden in her kingdom, and it's considered treason, and it's punishable by death, and it's not a fun death. I think it's like death by 1,000 cuts, which sounds horrible. So she doesn't want that to happen, so it has to be very secret and kept on the down low. So once she goes and sees that soothsayer, she has to sort of figure out what to do with the information that is given to her, and she can't really trust anyone, not even her own family and her court, because nobody really cares about her, really wants her to succeed, so she's kind of not really sure who she can lean on during this whole investigation of her father's death. So she seeks the help of an investigator named Akira, who has a lot of secrets of his own and is actually a convict himself, to sort of help her navigate what she's doing and trying to figure out what actually happened with her father. And it's kind of just trying to figure out what happened and who's lying and who's telling the truth. So reasons why I liked it: it has very beautiful writing. I think the writing is very gorgeous. I kind of like also that you start off and you're kind of a little bit in the middle of what's happened. It's not like it's confusing, like it's very, the world and what's happening is sort of explained in the first couple chapters, but it also isn't like you just start like from the beginning and then things happen. You'll understand if you read this book, like you'll see how it weans itself into the storyline, and you kind of just have to sort of adjust yourself to the world, not in a bad way, in a good way. There are a lot of really interesting characters. I think Hisina is a wonderful female lead. I think she's very powerful and she's very smart. Her family members are really interesting and have their own pretty developed character arcs, which I think is cool, because even though they're like secondary characters, they still get kind of their own focus within the plot. Nobody is reliable in this book, which keeps things really intriguing. But like I was saying earlier, she can't really trust anyone in the novel, so she kind of just like winging it as she goes and trying to figure out who she can actually communicate. And when it comes to like figuring out like court politics or like what has happened to her dad, all of those different things. There's a good mixture of themes also discussed in this book, so it doesn't focus on just one thing. You kind of have things about like politics and morality and loyalty and family, so there's a lot mixed together to sort of keep this story going. And I'm glad you like Unreliable Narrator. Thank you for saying that. Definitely recommend, because all the characters are really like, you're like, oh, who's telling the truth and who's actually committed treason, and you don't really know what's happening. Also, this book is kind of a slow build, but it is still really compelling to read. Slow doesn't mean bad. I feel like people think because it's a slower book, that's like a negative connotation, but that's actually a good thing, especially when you're kind of looking at, it's like a murder mystery, essentially. Like, there's a lot going on, but it's a murder mystery. And it's nice that it's a slow build, and it's because it's like, it's still really compelling despite being a slow build, and I think that just speaks to like the power of the book, and that like the storytelling is really well done because of it. Anyways, so those are my 2 fantasy recommendations. I also wanted to stick in a contemporary book, just because the last 2 ones I've done contemporary, and I just enjoy contemporary as a genre. And this is also kind of a harder hitting contemporary novel, just like the ones from the previous weeks. So this one is called A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi. And it's recommended on Common Sense Media for ages 13 and up. It's done in audiobook format and Hoopla. I will say that there are triggers for Islamophobia and xenophobia in this book, so if that's something that maybe makes you uncomfortable, or you kind of have a hard time with that for whatever reason, just know that before you go into it. So this book follows a Muslim teen named Shirin, 1 year post 9/11. So, basically it's sort of following her and her family, and they're all Muslim, they're Persian, and they're practicing Islam, and of course it's 1 year after 9/11, so she deals with a lot of really horrific prejudice and discrimination and stereotyping for a lot, like, just because people are awful. But, you know, she also wears the hijab, so she has to deal with that as well, from how people receive that, and, you know, they're very cruel to her, and it's really hard to read about, but it's important to read about just to be more aware and more educated about, like, discrimination and combating it. It's also, like, before I go on, it's also sort of semi-autobiographical, so this is sort of Tahereh Mafi based a lot of experiences she had growing up during this time period as someone who practices Islam and wears a headscarf or hijab. So it's kind of based on personal experience that she's talking about these things. But so Shirin is a high schooler during this time. She's a sophomore in high school, and she doesn't really have a lot of friends, and she doesn't really trust a lot of people because a lot of people have been really horrible to her whole life because of their views on her religion, whether or not they actually, like, they don't ever really actually understand or take the time to get to know her. They just kind of make these horrible judgments about her, and, you know, it makes her fairly very upset, and it kind of has made her pretty closed off to talking to other people because she's just experienced a lot of discrimination. But then she meets this boy named Ocean at her new school, who is actually one of the first people to, like, really try and, like, correct himself if he says things that are kind of stereotyping, and he wants to learn, and he really tries to be accepting, and that's not something she's really ever experienced before. So they sort of develop a relationship, and that's kind of like a big part of the novel. And then they also kind of have to deal with a lot of backlash from their relationship because people in their town are just really horrible to. It's really hard to read. Like, I just want y'all to know before you go into it, it's hard to read just because a lot of really awful things, like, happen to Shirin, but it's, I think, a really important read. And it's, like, very well executed and really realistic, and really explains, like, what it was like to be Muslim during that time period, which I can't even imagine what that was like to live through. And I think that the book does a good job at making the reader sort of understand, like, what was going on during that time and what it was like and stuff like that. Shirin also kind of has an outside sort of friend group, and this is kind of a secondary plot, but sort of inclusive to the main plot, with her brother, and they do breakdancing, and they're kind of learning about that, and it's a new activity that Sharon gets to participate in. And it's like one of the first things that she's really gotten to do at a school because of just like the outward stereotyping that she's experienced. So it becomes really important to her because it's something, breakdancing is something her and her brother were really into when they were kids, and then they get to meet new people who are also interested in, who they become friends with, and it kind of creates like a space, like a place for children to feel like welcomed and accepted and have fun. So the reasons I liked it, like I said previously, I think it's a really well done novel, and it really like explains what it was like. It's like specifically Tahereh Mafi's sort of own experience, as it was semi-autobiographical. Not everyone has the same experiences, but it is important to sort of find different ways of seeing different experiences, and I think this book allows that. It's really educational for the reader because you can learn about Persian culture and, you know, the prejudice that was like going on during that time, and, you know, the history behind breakdancing. Like, there's a lot of stuff to learn within the text. So I think that's really cool that she tackles a lot of different issues in the book, and she makes it like digestible information. Like I was saying last week, I think with Angie Thomas was on the come up is that the writing is pretty simplistic and straightforward, but it's really effective in that it's very clear and it helps really educate people. And I think that Tahereh Mafi does a really similar thing in this book, and I think it's really effective. The characters also felt very real. They had, you know, they felt like high school students, and they felt like they were having real human reactions to what was happening around them. Like, Sharon was not happy a lot of the time because of things that she was dealing with. Like, she acted like a real person, and she talked about when she was hurt, but she also sort of talked about like moments with Ocean that made her really happy, and like she had a really good dynamic with her family that made her feel really loved, and I thought that was really good. So, you know, she's complex, she's a three-dimensional character, and she, I think, is really well done and really interesting to read about. The audiobook narrator for this book is also really good. She really captures like a good emotional range for Sharon and is really good at like articulating the emotional response that would happen. Like, wasn't like a dull, boring, like if there were really intense sections of the novel, she really like did a good job at narrating that. And then this book is also pretty short, but I think it's very impactful for how short it is, which I think says a lot, again, about like the issues and Tahereh Mafi's ability to tell a story through this character, because even though it's short, I still like felt a lot of different things and learned about a lot of different things. Like, there were times when I was listening to this book that I wanted to throw my phone across the room because I was really mad, but then there were times that I was really happy that things were going well for Sharon and her family, and it made me excited that things were going well. So yeah, so I think it's definitely worth a read, and it's a good educational read. So yeah, those are the 3 books that I wanted to talk about today. So those are 2 fantasy recommendations and 1 contemporary. I think you can't go wrong with any of them. It kind of just depends on what you're in the mood for. I think like my favorite out of all 3 was definitely A Very Large Expanse of Sea. That's because I really like hard-hitting contemporary novels. But I also really thought Shadow of the Fox and Descendant of the Crane were interesting reads as well. So thank you for tuning in. I really enjoyed talking about this, and I will see you all on Friday. Goodbye.